And now we turn to the man who it is impossible to buy a surprise gift present for at Christmas because he's got someone embedded with your shopping. There's no question of that. James O'Keefe, an award-winning journalist and the founder and president of both Project Veritas and Project Veritas Action, nonprofit organizations dedicated to investigating corruption, dishonesty, waste, and fraud in both the public and private institutions. Let me tell you, they're not about to run out anytime soon. He is also the author of the New York Times bestseller Breakthrough, Our Guerrilla War to Expose Fraud and Save Democracy, and the upcoming book American Pravda, My Fight for Truth in the Era of Fake News, which will be released on January 16th, 2018. I think you can get the audiobook in pre-order right now. We'll put the links to all that below. ProjectVeritas.com. Give them a bit of a Merry Christmas. Help them out. And Twitter.com/James O'Keefe, I. James, thanks so much for taking the time today.
Great to be with you again.
So as public-facing figures, sometimes the private relationship, family, community, Christmassy stuff can be both exciting, rewarding, and a little bit of a challenge. Is there much bleed over from what you do publicly to what happens around Christmas for you?
You know, not really. I think in the beginning years of my life, I was very close with my grandfather, James O'Keefe Sr. I'm the third, and my grandparents lived with me. My parents lived with me. I always had a very close familiar relationship. In the last few years, as this war has intensified, I think, and I moved into a new facility, I've become a lot more independent. But Christmas season is always one where I go back home. I always spend that time with my family and completely avoid talking about this war. I guess in the beginning, there was no discussion about the war. In my mid-20s, there was sort of like, oh, we're always talking about it. And now we're back down to, okay, I need to retreat from this war and into this private Christmas moment where we just talk about life and happiness and family.
And it's funny, too, because in a sort of traditional war, not the sort of war of ideas and words and exposure that we're engaged in traditional war, you're overseas, you come back for Christmas, and there's massive support for what you're doing. There's no ambivalence. Every family member is behind you 150%. But for a lot of people, the seams or the cracks in this culture war go through the family. And so you're out there fighting on D-Day. You come home for Christmas, man. There's no one who's going to say a bad word about anything that you're doing. But it's a little bit different engaging in the culture wars because the seams, as I said, they run through families, can cause a lot of tension.
I will tell you an anecdote without getting too deep into it, but my sister got married recently to a Canadian. She got married to a guy from British Columbia, and her parents had a few drinks, the in-laws for my sister's family, and I come over to their house for an event, and I was not anticipating talking about politics at all or talking about Veritas. I actually go into these situations with a sort of humility, not wanting to ever be divisive. I just want to be, avoided almost, and because I don't want people are upset, and I don't want to upset my in-laws or my sister's in-laws. And they just came out, attacking and very emotional. And it got really emotional. And I can tell you on a human level that it hurt a lot to me because I love my sister and I want my sister to be happy and I don't want to cause any turmoil. But they pushed so hard, the in-laws did, that they felt pretty bad about it. So there is some serious... as you say, a schism, or as you would put it, a rift inside families with how polarized our society is and the symbol that I have become, it definitely hits very close to home in many of these cases.
I don't know what it is with the coastal places, man. Is it like sea salt air brings socialism to people? Because it's the same. For those who don't know much about British Columbia, it's basically the California of Canada. So it is on the left coast. I guess they look at the left on the map and say, well, that's where I have to be, and pretty ferocious. And it's funny, too, because, the work that you do, whether you're on the left or the right, doesn't particularly matter because you are speaking truth to power. You are repeating what people, you're giving people the chance to say what they want to say, and you're repeating it publicly. How could they possibly get that mad without openly exposing their motive of shooting the messenger?
Well, I'll say two things about that, Stefan. That day, actually, I was going on the Rush Limbaugh show to be interviewed, and And I honestly said I believe sincerely in what I'm doing, and I'm not going to stop. And they felt so bad for attacking me so hard. They actually listened to the Rush Limbaugh interview, and they came back and said, okay, maybe there's. In other words, I think that not to get too far off track, but I think the enemy or the opposition to the truth, I think they want to dehumanize and delegitimize someone's humanity. And I think the more they actually talk to you and the more they actually get to know you and what motivates you and what your passions are, I think the less they can hate you. And these people had never met me before, and we're family. We're going to be family forever. And I think the first time I ever met them, they're coming out attacking me, and why don't you listen to me talk? And when they did, they said, okay, this guy really sincerely believes in what he's doing, and we love him for it. So it was kind of just getting to know each other on a personal level, and everything's okay now.
But the turnaround, that is quite a it's like watching a disaster movie where the plane just lands perfectly, even though it's like 3 feet from the ground, nose down. So that kind of turnaround, that's pretty remarkable, whether that's a Canadian thing or not. Because I think that what is important is to recognize that the motives are good. The motives are good. Now, people might disagree with the outcomes and so on. Like this standard people, oh, if you're not on the left, you just hate the poor. It's like, nope. Kind of love the poor, kind of want to help the poor, want to have opportunities to have jobs and build meaningful lives and have stable families, really love the poor. Or, the Trumpists are racist. And it's like, but the numbers just came out and unemployment is down in Black and Hispanic communities. So that's wonderful. That's exactly what you would want, to have those communities grow and be more stable and happy and positive and so on. So I think disagreement on outcome is different from attacking existential motives. And if people take the latter course, it's really tough to recover. Well,
and that's a great point. This is the utility. I believe we are in a war. It is an existential war. I would call it an electronic civil war. It's a war of information, and our end is truth. Okay, that some people's end is an agenda. Some people's end is, I don't know, getting someone elected, or defunding their program, or so forth and so much. Our goal is to just expose truth. That is our end. And the thing about war is that all means are justifiable if you believe in the end. I mean, it's in war, it's moral or ethical to kill someone to fight the enemy. And if you're in an alley and a policeman shoots someone, well, it's justified depending upon whether he acted in self-defense. So I, of course, believe that our techniques are justified and ethical and morally necessary for purposes of the most paramount thing, which is the truth. But if you don't accept the premise that there's anything wrong with our media, then you don't think these techniques are justified. The media cannot abide us. I don't mean to put them on the spot. I love my sisters-in-laws, and we've had this conversation, and everything's fine. But they don't believe. If you don't accept the premise that the media is broken, you certainly won't accept the premise that the means that we utilize are justified in exposing the media. But of course, when Upton Sinclair when the meat was spoiled and rotting and people were poisoned, use any means necessary. When you're exposing the chickens in the slaughterhouse, use any means necessary. So it's really not. It's a situational ethics, and we are at war. But what makes it so interesting is that our end is simply the truth. Revealing things for people. And so you're right, motivation, means and ends, humanizing someone. These are all the things that go into this sort of calculus when people make their judgments.
It is one of the great tragedies of, I guess, human history, certainly of American history and Middle East history, that I genuinely believe if someone like you was around in 2002, 2003, and the distribution mechanisms were available, that the invasion of Iraq could have been prevented. Because the number of lies that were being fed to the general population regarding Saddam Hussein, his regime, his history with the United States, his supposed weapons of mass destruction, and so on, and this fantasy that you were going to wave your wand of violence and create a Jeffersonian democracy in such a tortured land. If someone like you or you had been around, it's like the Terminator tumbling backwards through time to save the world kind of thing. And who knows what other wars may be averted or what other disasters may be averted, because if we had this kind of unraveling of a mainstream narrative back in 2002, 2003, I think that hundreds of thousands of lives could have been saved. An entire region might have been prevented from destabilization, even with Syria and Libya and so on. There may be no migrant crisis threatening the survival of Europe and so on. So
Yeah.
it is one of these things that it's been absolutely necessary throughout history. And the fact that it's happening now should give everyone great relief that somebody's feet is being held to the fire who have lied to great negative effect in the past.
The medium has been the proximate cause. That is to say, the dissemination of information circumventing the mainstream media has been the proximate cause for people to distrust the media. So, the method, like I read this Glenn Greenwald piece right before I came on your show about how broken the media was with the CNN thing went through last week with the WikiLeaks fake news about Don Trump Jr. I mean, the media people are seeing the media is broken because there's a mechanism by which to bypass the media. And now it's starting to become mainstream. And this is the war that I'm fighting. If you want to know what the actual inflection point is, whether it's justified to investigate and expose the mainstream media. And they buy ink by the barrel. So we haven't quite reached the tipping point, as Malcolm Gladwell would call it, where the media has lost all of its power. I still think the media has power. I think you would say that too. I mean, I think they're losing power. But so if our methods, if social media and the hidden camera and the dissemination were available 15 years ago, we simply would have accelerated this trend towards truth, and that's where we are right now. Although, Stefan, the social media companies, what's going to happen next is they're going to start censoring people like me, and I'll have to find a new paradigm by which to distribute the information.
Right. It's funny how in war, the only success is increased opposition. That's how you know that you're winning.
That's it. Yeah, excellent.
Now, when it comes to growing up,
yes,
what kind of kid were you with regards to Christmas? Because when I was growing up, sort of the kids who were just like, yeah, I'll go to church. It's uncomfortable, but it's all about the toys, man. I'm going to get up earlier to get those toys. And there were other kids who, the toys were nice, but there really was a kind of spirit of the season that was imbuing their heart and mind. Where were you on that sort of continuum?
Well, I was very much into video games as a child. I was an introverted child. I loved playing Legend of Zelda and these types of games, and I was totally focused on that as a child. But Easter, Christmas, the religious holidays, my grandfather and my dad and I would actually work on these holidays. We'd actually go out and my dad had a couple rental properties, and I would fix plumbing, roofing, tile. We worked on holidays as a child, and I actually credit my grandfather with instilling sort of a very ridiculous drive and work ethic into me. And I would always wonder, why the heck do we have to do this on the holiday itself? Like, we're on Christmas Eve until 11 o'clock painting a wall. And what now it's, what would be ironic sort of became normal to me, and other people not working on these holidays was odd. But that was just sort of the odd sort of upbringing that I had. And we took a few hours to actually open gifts, and then we went back to work, because the holiday season was a time when you could work interrupted, right? So anyway, that was a little bit.
Well, it's funny because then you go to your friends, and your friends are all like, you ask your friends, well, what did you do on Christmas? They're like, oh, I stayed up late. I watched a whole bunch of movies, and we slept in. We had pancakes. And you're like, well, I was fixing a toilet, and that's my Christmas experience. And let me tell you,
it was actually a septic tank once. I'm not making this up. There was a septic tank on one of these properties in New Jersey, and my grandfather and my father would they came up with an ingenious way to empty the septic tank through a PVC pipe and a pump. So for like $100 at Home Depot, we bought these tools, and I know this is kind of gross, but we emptied whatever it was, I don't know, 100 metric yards of poop through a tube, and I'm just doing this like on Easter. And I'm thinking to myself, and it's not ironic. It's just like, another day in the life, other people are looking for Easter eggs. But I really do, and I say this, I've said this a couple times. I really do credit my upbringing with, and I sort of resented my grandfather a little bit for how hard he pushed me. But I think it really taught me the value of hard work, and that whole cliche about just driven. To do whatever.
So when Trump starts talking about the drain the swamp thing, that has a pretty visceral connection to you. Like, oh yeah, I'm going to send him some PVC pipe and some children's tears, and next thing you know,
it was like an erector set. Like they put the thing down there, and we build a pipe, and for $100 you got resourcefulness, you're saving money, you're solving a complex problem, and yes, draining the swamp.
And it is a funny thing, you know, because the stuff that you hate as a kid turns out to be annoyingly valuable when you get older. You know, it's like that old Mark Twain thing where he says, you know, I left home when I was 16 because my dad was such an ignoramus. I came back 2 years later. I was amazed at how much he'd learned in the intervening 2 years. Because, I mean, yeah, I got my first job when I was 10, and I was always kind of resentful that, not always, sometimes I got the value of it. But, you know, my friends who was like, oh, they got to read economics books sitting by the pool over the summer, right. And I'm just sitting there working 3 jobs to pay the rent and all of that. But you have to work really hard to end up doing what you love. And you don't really understand that when you're younger. And having that kind of work ethic does get you through to a place where you can do what you love. And I don't know people who've ended up doing what they love without having to work really hard beforehand. And that is a kind of weird Christmas gift. You know, the fact that you're draining a crap full of swimming pool gunk, in a sense, gives you a great life when you get older, a life of meaning and purpose and power and virtue. But it's a pretty hard passage to get through at the time.
There was one time when my grandfather, I was peeling off wallpaper. Again, my dad owned a couple of houses, and we would do all the work ourselves. I mean, there's no illegal labor. There's no assistance. It's just me, my dad, and my grandfather. It was actually kind of we get into a pickup truck, him, the 3 of us, James O'Keefe the third, James O'Keefe Jr. and James O'Keefe Sr. running around New Jersey doing some of the most dirty jobs you can imagine. And one time I must have been, it was 1996. I was 12 years old, and I was peeling wallpaper off the wall with my fingernails all day. And my grandfather would supervise me. Okay, you missed a spot.
With your fingernails?
With my fingernails, because we didn't have the requisite tool or whatnot. And it's a long time ago.
Are you sure you weren't actually in prison at the time? I mean, were you trying to get like Birdman of Alcatraz style?
It wasn't a form of abuse. There was some carpenter justification for using a fingernail in this. It was like a corner or something. It wasn't, you know, there was a purpose behind it.
It sounds like the way a ferret would try and get out of an overturned aquarium or something like that. You know?
I'm peeling the thing, and I'm thinking, why do I? And he, my grandfather looks at me, and he goes, you got to do what you got to do to survive. And I'm thinking, survival? I'm just trying to get the wallpaper off the wall. But there was this sort of deep understanding of doing whatever it takes. And I'll say something else about the Christmas season as you grow older. And I'm 33 now. This incident was now 20 years ago. I think in life you mentioned the Mark Twain quip. I think what I've discovered in my life is being a young man. Yes, you think, oh, my dad doesn't know anything, and then you have this moment in life where maybe it's the 20s midlife crisis, because I've had a lot of experiences as a young guy. I mean, I was interrogated by the FBI and arrested, and there's a whole story there, and it's terrible. And then you have this respect for your parents. Oh my God, they knew everything. I can't believe. But sometimes in life, you have experiences that are even beyond what your parents have experienced, and you learn things that they don't know. And you become learned in ways that they aren't. And that's yet another test for someone in life is, yes, there's that Twain quip about learning from your dad and respecting him. And but what happens when you learn too much? And then you have an additional challenge on your relationship. And then you go back and you get, so it's family life when you're a public figure engaged in this battle is very complex and very unique.
But I think that's an argument, James, that's the result of successful parenting. The fact that you can outstrip the necessities of life that your parents did not need to outstrip. The fact that you can go further than they did means that they gave you a kind of foundation that gives you the strength to do what you're doing. So in a sense, if my daughter vastly outstrips me going forward in life, yay, good. That would be fantastic. That would mean that I would take some small part in the credit for that. So
yes, that's a very good point. And that's the fourth, I suppose the fourth the climax or the fourth wave of this installment. We've got a long ways to go. But my parents, my family, my sister, all of us are so incredibly close. I'm very fortunate to have a family that we truly understand each other and love one another. And frankly, my sister has reminded me, especially in the holiday season, of who I am. The media has a tendency to build up an archetype and tear it down. And it's all just a fiction. It's all just a faguzzi. The media just manufactures consent. And in the beginning, now I have people like you. There's a whole community there's just a whole movement of people. But you have to remember that in 2009, things were a little bit different. And you have to be reminded of who you are by the people that you love. And that's the importance of family.
Oh, it is an amazing thing, James, that the people who see us in public, it is easy, and I think of the things that you've gone through and the way in which you're attacked, and you have this basically a fluttering cape and tight pants in my mind. But it is important for people to remember that the public-facing people who you view as very courageous, absolutely there's courage involved. But it's like tip of the iceberg of the support structure underneath. You know, the fact that you have your family, that I have my support structure, I'm able to do what I do not because of the sheer force of will that I have, which is not inconsiderable, but it's because of the people around me, because of the support structure. Because if you look at the way in which you're portrayed, in particular by the media, I mean, the media, it's like looking at one of those weird, ripply funhouse mirrors, except you've got horns and you're eating babies or something like that. You know, like when you look at how you're portrayed in the media, they try and infect you with that self-image so that you feel immoral in your own conscience. And of course, you need to go to the people who love you and who respect what you're doing and treasure what you're doing to refuel. And so having that kind of support system is, for me at least, it's why I'm able to do what I'm doing. And people don't see that from the outside.
Yeah, and the Project Veritas team here is solid as a rock. My core team, we're pretty much a family. I mean, the administrative team, the media team, the fundraising team, the production team, and many of our UCJs, undercovers. We are so solid. And when we're going through these media fights, it's amazing. I have to be kind of a leader to them, but in many ways, they're kind of a leader to me, because we remind each other of the core principles and the raison d'etre of what we're doing. And it fuels us. You know, we went through a pretty last 2 weeks. Media's thrown more at us in the last 2 weeks than we've ever really seen. The hatred and the animosity, and every one of our donors, Stefan, this Christmas season has told us that they're going to renew. Every one of them. I got the New York Times called every donor foundation that's ever supported us. Everyone. There's actually this front page story in the New York Times a few days ago, and they called every donor and they said, "Are you going to keep supporting James?" One of these donors sent me an email with the query from the New York Times and said, "F the New York Times. I'm giving you 10 times what I gave you last time because I've never had the New York Times call me, and that's how I know that you guys are doing good work." So when I see messages like that, I'm reminded why we're doing what we're doing. The people that are my family, that is our supporters, our team, our donors, they remind me the existential nature of what it is that we're doing. And I get empowered. I get, we're doing something, because I'm human. It's not going to feel good when you're pilloried by all these people.
Well, and here's the thing that's interesting to me about that as well, James, is that the New York Times and these other mainstream media outlets will be better off as the result of this process. It's almost like you're taking someone off heroin and they're going to fight and they're going to kick and they're going to scream and so on. And when you're trying to wean people off ideology, and the problem to me with the mainstream media is not the ideology. Fine, have your ideology, have your biases, but damn well be honest about it. Don't claim to be objective. So the fact that they are false to themselves, false to their ideals, false to their readers, false to their audience, and false to the freedoms that give them protections, they will be better off after kicking and screaming with the tough medicine of being exposed. It will make them better off. You know, if CNN finally figures out an editorial process that can weed out these endless domino series of flagellating lies on the general public, amazing. I don't remember a single false story about Barack Obama for 8 years that they had to retract. I mean, it's amazing. They had this perfect editorial process when there was a Democrat in the White House. And so they'll be better off. They will be better journalists. They'll be more honest people. They'll be happier with themselves. And this is why these kinds of attacks, it is kind of understandable. But if you have to wean people off a dangerous drug, they're going to get mad. But eventually, at some point, they or their readers or their shareholders, whoever, is going to thank you.
Well, I want to make one point about this Washington Post item. I know that this is a Christmas episode, but this is all.
It's happening around Christmas. We'll blend it in.
It's all interrelated. My family, my supporter. We have 20,000. We have 20,000 donors at Project. We're crowdsource funded. Even if 10% of my supporters go away, which they won't, nothing is ever going to stop this train from leaving the station. And the Washington Post, we did a few series of undercover videos in the Washington Post. One guy, Dan Lamothe, is his name, and Dan Lamothe is a reporter, national security writer. So I want to say something about Dan Lamothe's a good reporter. Okay, he's the national security writer for the Washington Post. He's the subject matter expert on all things Russia and all things national security. And this is what he says in this hidden camera to our guy. And we released this video in the week of all the negative publicity about Project Veritas. He says, quote, "I work for this place." The editorial section, he goes, "They're so biased." He said, quote, on the Russia, "You're spending a ton of time on this thing that's sensational." And he's aghast, Dan Lamothe is, that the people at the paper who are not the factual reporters, they are the opinion reporters, are embellishing, quote, "It's over the top." Always over the top, Lamothe comments. In fact, the other reporter says the Russia story, quote, "maybe doesn't exist." Now, these things were said in private to our hidden cameras. They were being honest. They were being true. These are the subject matter experts on all things Russia. So we released the story. What does Dan Lamothe say? The guy that we caught on tape, he goes, and this, I'm going to read his statement. He says, quote, "I regret being so open with strangers. That's the big lesson I've learned here." So he's apologizing for being truthful about the actual Russia story. Again, this guy is the subject matter expert on the story. So the opinion people who come up with their crap about Russia is a big thing, their story is not based in any fact. It's based in conjecture and narrative. The guy who's the subject matter expert puts out a statement saying that he's apologetic for being honest. And that is why, Stefan, why what we're doing is so important at Veritas, because that is the heart of the matter. What that right there is the reason why people distrust the media. Because if their own subject matter experts are apologizing for being honest about the fact that there's no story, then what is the whole matrix? What is the whole media matrix? What is it? What is it? If it's not based on the facts of the subject matter experts, what is it based on? What is it based on? And that's what we exposed. And the media says, O'Keefe's a failure, that doesn't matter. Well, if it's a failure, why is he apologizing? That is so interesting to me.
Well, and don't you kind of want to leave a trail of breadcrumbs from the mainstream media to what's called the alternative media? Out here among the stars, you can tell the truth. Out here, with the direct connection with your audience, you can be honest, you can be critical, you can think for yourself, you can challenge your audience. You're not dependent upon selling a fairy tale narrative. You're not dependent upon political considerations. You can just tell the truth. And I kind of want to leave these breadcrumbs because until you've experienced the sheer joy of being able to be honest in the world without fear of immediate death-defying consequences or getting fired or whatever. I mean, geez, we'll be fired if we don't tell the truth. These guys seem to be fired if they do tell the truth. I kind of want to leave these breadcrumbs out and say, like to the alcoholics, like, you think alcohol is good, you got to try being sober. It's fantastic. And it's like, you think that having this kind of power is good. Come out into the real world, have the power of truth, and you will never, ever be tempted to go back.
Yeah, Solzhenitsyn says, live not by lies. Live not by lies. That was the message of the Samizdat, the alternative publication in the Soviet Union. Lamothe says, quote, "I'm generally an open, friendly person, but I need to be more cautious." So that's like saying, I'm generally a truthful person, but I need to be careful about being truthful. That's all he's saying. And that was amazing. It was very overlooked. No one talked about it. I was facing an onslaught of 1,000 blue check-marked Twitter accounts from the mainstream media attacking us that doesn't matter. When that's everything. That is everything. The fact that they say the truth in private, but they're unwilling to say it in public. That's why Veritas doesn't just uncover fraudsters. We uncover truthful people, people in the establishment who are not willing to go public with their truths.
And that would be a great Christmas present for people. The opportunity to be honest, because it is a war, and the liars are on one side and the people really genuinely curious about the truth and willing to pursue it to the end of the earth in order to get it. That is the real war. And defection, you defect in a war, you're in big trouble. You defect in this, defect from the liars to the truth tellers, you're welcome with open arms. And I just sort of want to put that out there for people.
That's also part of the history of the Soviet Union, when they created this sort of terrifying state where, Stalin. It's, by the way, all of it's history repeating itself. I think that all of these lessons are in history. But what did Stalin? The courageous people went to rot in the gulag. It was the traitors and the sellouts and the people who sold out their friends and testified against their own family, who were rewarded. That's why Solzhenitsyn said, live not by lies. And we face the same test in media today. That praise of the mainstream media, it is so such a treat for people and such a temptation for people to get the praise from the New York Times. And I've seen it. I've seen it in my life. I've seen people sell me out just because they know that if they do, they will be positively quoted on the pages of the New York Times. And it is probably the most hurtful, it's like that scene in Braveheart where Mel Gibson is unmasking the opposition, and he realizes that under the mask is his own friend. It just makes you rethink everything, and it's probably the most damaging thing that I have seen thus far.
Oh, I've seen people betray half their life principles for a positive byline in Newsweek. And what a terrible deal. You get one positive byline, doesn't end up meaning anything, and then you have to live with your own betrayal for the rest of your life.
And you have to justify it, and I can't live with that. We can't defy our conscience, right? We can't live with ourselves. It's that Thomas Paine quote, that let them call me rebel, but I would suffer the misery of devils were I to make a whore of my soul. And that is really how we feel. It's really you separates the men from the boys, and it's the character building aspect of this process where you really figure out who has character and who doesn't, because when the stuff hits the fan, you're going to see that pretty quickly. So there is a silver lining to this process, and it's only making us stronger and better as we proceed into our next foray. Our next, we're putting the finishing touches on our next big sting, so that should be fun.
Is that going to be out before Christmas, do you think?
Oh, I don't think so, but it'll hopefully be out in the new year, very, very soon. Listen, you open the segment by saying we'll never be out of work. Truer words have never been said. We will never be out of work in this country.
Well, philosophy manufactures a lot of honest people, but unfortunately the government schools, the indoctrination camps of higher education and the mainstream media are cranking out a lot of freedom-hating zombies. But, we've got the cure for that as well. So if you do want to help out James with what he's doing, I'm sure a Christmas present would not go amiss. You can go to projectveritas.com to help them out and support what they do. Thanks, of course, for a fascinating year. I mean, I'm as giddy as a schoolgirl on Christmas morning when you post new videos, and the work that you're doing is amazing. And thanks so much for taking the time today.
And pick up a copy of American Pravda, our book. If you want to support us, American Pravda at Barnes & Nobles or wherever else. Thank you.
Thank you.